The boat sat at the far end of the marina warehouse like something the tide had forgotten to take back out. Its hull was chalky with dried salt, the fiberglass gone dull and spider cracked along the transom, and the handwritten tag zip tied to the rail read $3,000 to $4,500, no reserve. Nobody stood near it. Nobody even slowed down as they passed. Then Celeste Marchetti, president of Marchetti & Klein, the most respected marine estate auction house on the eastern seaboard, walked past it, glanced down at the man kneeling by the keel with a headlamp on, and said 5 words loud enough for half the room to hear. "That one's not worth listing." The man didn't look up. He didn't argue. He just kept running his fingers along the center line with the unhurried focus of someone who already suspected something the room didn't. What had Theo Marsh found in that hull that an entire room of appraisers had missed? The answer turned out to be worth $6 million, and it started with something his grandfather had spent 40 years trying to prove. Theo Marsh loaded the last of his dive gear into the bed of his truck at 6:45 on a Thursday morning, checked his mirrors out of habit, and pulled out of the gravel lot behind his boat repair shop on the Rhode Island coast. Sea fog still sat low over the harbor, thick enough that the channel markers only appeared a few boat lengths out. His daughter Josie, 7 years old, sat beside him with her stuffed seal, Barnacle, wedged between her knees. She had her late mother's habit of waking up fully alert, no groggy in between. "What's the best boat you've ever seen?" she asked, adjusting Barnacle's flipper with great seriousness. For years earlier, Theo had been a marine surveyor for a firm that restored and authenticated classic racing yachts, a job he'd taken not because of connections, but because of an obsessive, slightly exhausting fluency with old hull construction that made most dinner parties uncomfortable. His grandfather, Walter Marsh, had spent 4 decades chasing the history of a single vanished boat. The Meridian, a radical experimental racing sloop built by a small, short-lived Newport boatyard in 1958, famous in narrow circles for a hull shaped decades ahead of its time, and lost, according to every written record, in a boathouse fire in 1962. Walter talked about the Meridian the way other grandfathers talk about the one that got away. Theo had grown up on that story the way other kids grow up on fairy tales. His wife, Renata, had died in a car accident when Josie was 2. Theo left the surveying firm 8 months later, not because the work was too hard, but because 6-week authentication trips and a 2-year-old in Rhode Island don't mix in any way that matters. He opened the repair shop. He learned to braid hair badly and pack lunches well. He kept his grandfather's research files in a milk crate under his workbench. Today he was at a marina liquidation preview, the kind of sale where an old yacht club storage building gets emptied out and everything inside gets tagged and sold before the property changes hands. He wasn't there for the polished day sailors or the restored classics up front. He was there for the back row, the stuff nobody bothered photographing for the catalog. He dropped Josie at the marina's little supervised playroom, kissed the top of her head, and walked into the warehouse with a headlamp in his jacket pocket and his grandfather's voice somewhere behind his eyes. The warehouse was cavernous and already crowded with preview guests moving with the easy confidence of people used to rooms full of expensive things. Theo worked the edges, reading tags, pausing at a crate of vintage bronze winches. Then he turned a corner near the back wall and stopped. The hull was wedged between 2 dry-docked cruisers, half covered by a blue tarp someone clearly hadn't bothered to remove properly. The paint was a flat, ugly gray, decades newer than the boat itself, and the deck hardware had been stripped down to almost nothing. But underneath the neglect, the sheer line, the curve running from bow to stern, had a tension to it he didn't recognize from any production hull of any era he knew. He crouched down, clicked on his headlamp, and ran a hand along the keel joint. He was still crouched there when footsteps stopped beside him. Celeste Marchetti looked down at him with an expression somewhere between mild curiosity and irritation, the look of someone interrupted by a problem she hadn't asked for. Her assistant, a young woman named Priya Nandan, clipboard in hand, stood half a step behind her. "This lot has no real value," Celeste said, her voice carrying cleanly across the room. "It's here as a courtesy to the estate. We didn't want to refuse the family outright." She paused, letting that land, then added, with precise, unhurried cruelty, "I'm honestly not sure this preview is the right fit for every budget range." A couple of nearby guests glanced over. One almost smiled. Theo didn't stand immediately. He looked at the hull for another 2 seconds, headlamp still on, then rose and met her eyes with no particular expression. "Thanks for letting me know," he said. She moved on. Priya lingered half a beat longer than she needed to. When Theo glanced up, she looked away first. A man in a quarter zip and boat shoes that had clearly never touched a boat appeared briefly at the edge of the room. Desmond Cray, a mid-tier collector who'd spent 2 decades flipping vintage racing hulls for a living. He gave the lot a quick, practiced once over, found nothing worth his time, and moved on. Theo pocketed his headlamp and walked to registration. The auction thinned out fast after the marquee lots. 2 restored classic day sailors and a set of estate-owned sextants cleared in the first half hour. The gray hull came up near the end of the session, after most of the room had drifted into side conversations and second coffees. "Lot 31, the auctioneer said, in the same brisk tone he'd used for everything. "Hull, condition unknown, sold as is, no warranty, no reserve. Opening at 1,500. 1,500 became 2,500 in under a minute. Then the room went quiet, the particular quiet of a room where nobody especially wants something. Theo raised his paddle at 4,000. Desmond Cray, arms crossed in the back corner, noticed and raised his own out of pure reflex. 4,500. Theo, 5,200. Cray studied him across the room. The work jacket, the way Theo was watching the hull instead of the auctioneer, and set his paddle down. "Not worth a fight," his face said. The gavel came down. Priya slid the paperwork across the table without quite looking like she was watching his face. "What did you see in it?" she asked, quiet enough not to carry. "Not sure yet," Theo said, signing. "I think I'll know by the weekend." He worked alone in the shop that first night after Josie was asleep, moving around the hull in the same slow, outside-in pattern his grandfather always used, starting with the surface and working toward whatever it was hiding. Under the cheap gray paint, sanded back in a careful strip along the center line, he found something else entirely. A hand-laid fiberglass schedule with a resin pour pattern that belonged to a specific, obsessive builder from a specific decade, not a production yard. He photographed everything. Then he went below, into the cramped, awkward crawl space under the cockpit sole that most people never bother inspecting because you practically have to fold yourself in half to see it. There, stamped into a bronze plate half hidden by decades of grime, were the words, "Built Meridian Yards, Hull and O. 1, 1958. Theo didn't make a sound. He read it 3 times. His grandfather had described this exact plate in a recorded interview Theo had transferred to his phone years ago and listened to so many times he could recite it. "If you ever find a plate that says Hull 1, don't touch anything else. Call me first thing. Check the centerboard trunk. There's a second mark there, one almost nobody knows to look for." Theo climbed down further, into the centerboard trunk, and found it. A second stamp, smaller, cut by hand into the wood backing plate. W. Halloran, Master Builder. He sat back against the hull and stayed there a while. Josie appeared in the shop doorway at 2 a.m., hair a mess, barnacle hanging from one hand. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Go back to sleep." She studied him, then the boat, with the evaluating look kids give adults they suspect are underreporting. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I think I might have," he said. She padded back to bed. He called a number he hadn't used in 2 years. Dr. Evelyn Haas was 74, retired director of the Northeast Maritime Heritage Archive, and the only living authority on the Meridian Yards operation, and the granddaughter of William Halloran, the yard's master builder. Theo had met her once as a boy, at a conference his grandfather dragged him to, and once as an adult. He didn't explain the whole situation over the phone. He just read 3 things off his notes. Meridian Yards, Hull 1, 1958. Halloran stamp, centerboard trunk. The silence on the line went on long enough that he checked whether the call had dropped. "Send me every photo you have," she said. "Right now." 2 hours later, she called back on video, with a colleague, a hull construction historian named Marcus Ide, one of the few researchers who'd handled the original Meridian Yards records before most of them were lost. He went through the photos without speaking for nearly 20 minutes. When he finally spoke, it was to the screen, not to Theo. "That layup schedule. That's Halloran's hand. Nobody else built like that. Dr. Haas didn't need it translated." My grandfather built this boat, she said quietly. Then, more carefully, if the hull is unmodified below the waterline, and if that centerboard stamp is genuine, Theo, there's no second hull one. The fire took the yard's records. It never took the boat. Estimated value? Theo asked. A pause. We'd need formal authentication before anyone puts a number on it. But conservatively, for the only surviving example of a design that quietly changed offshore racing hull theory for the next 20 years, I'd say 4 to 6 million, possibly more. Theo ended the call and stood at the shop window for a long time, watching Josie in the little fenced yard next door, walking Barnacle along the top of a piling, narrating something to herself too quiet to hear. The black SUV showed up outside the shop at 9 the next morning. Desmond Cray came in without knocking, a young lawyer trailing him with a folder already open. You bought a hull at Marchetti's session 2 days ago, Desmond said. I bought a boat. Paperwork's clean. Not here about the paperwork. Desmond set the folder on the workbench. A contract, a number printed in bold, $150,000, same-day wire. Theo didn't look at it. No. You paid $5,200. I'm offering $150,000. That's more than reasonable. No, Theo said again, same tone. Desmond's face shifted, the friendliness dropping away. The estate's lawyers are reviewing whether an item of undisclosed value was properly represented in the sale terms. Sold as is. No reserve, no representation of value, from either side. I read the terms before I bid. The sale's final. The lawyer went very still, which told Theo more than anything Desmond had said. Josie appeared in the doorway, barnacle under one arm, looking at the stranger with open curiosity. Desmond glanced at her, then back at Theo, something shifting behind his eyes. 200,000, he said. Final. Josie, Theo said evenly, not looking away from Desmond. Go on upstairs, please. When her footsteps faded, Theo said, You should leave before I call my attorney. Desmond left. He paused at the door to look once more at the gray, unremarkable hull on the lift, worthless to any eye but the right one, and his expression wasn't the look of a man giving up. Dr. Haas drove down the next morning with a leather document case and a film camera. She stood just inside the shop door for a long moment, still, the way someone stands when they've waited a lifetime for something and aren't yet sure it's real. Then she crouched by the centerboard trunk and pressed her palm flat against the wood over her grandfather's stamp. This is his mark, she said, not really to Theo. I'd know it anywhere. The authentication took most of the afternoon. Hull comparison against original Meridian blueprints, cross-checking resin and fiber samples, matching the layup pattern against Halloran's known technique. Every piece confirmed. And then, tucked into a sealed tin fitted behind the centerboard trunk's backing plate, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow kept the damp out for 65 years, she found a single folded sheet. The original build record, dated April 1958, signed at the bottom in a tight, slanting hand. W. Halloran, Master Builder. She held it without speaking for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. He hid it, she said. He knew the fire might take everything else. He hid the proof. By 5 that evening, Dr. Haas had signed and notarized a formal certificate. The vessel bearing the Meridian Yard's Hull 1 mark and matching build record was the sole surviving prototype from the Yard's 1958 program, with an estimated fair market value between $4.50 and $6 million, with potential for a higher realized price given its historical significance. She shook Theo's hand at the door. How did you find it? He glanced down at Josie, leaning against the doorframe with Barnacle balanced on her head. My grandfather taught me how to look, he said. Theo called Marchetti and Klein directly. Celeste answered with the crisp efficiency of someone managing a packed schedule, and Theo said what needed saying without preamble. He owned Hull 1. It had been formally authenticated. He wanted to sell it through her house, in a dedicated single-lot session. The silence on the line was different from a normal pause, longer, and shaped differently, like someone rearranging a picture in their head rather than pulling up a file. Lot 31, she said finally. Yes. Another silence. I'll need to see the documentation. We'll schedule a special session. Friday. We'll handle everything on our end. Her voice kept its professional edge, but something else had gone out of it, the particular quality of looking down at someone from a height. That was gone now. That evening, Josie sat on the stool by the workbench while Theo rebuilt a bilge pump on a boring, perfectly ordinary weekend cruiser. "Are you selling the ugly one?" she asked. "Yeah." "Why?" "You just found it." Theo set the pump housing down. "Because some things don't belong in just one person's shed," he said. Josie turned Barnacle over in her hands. "Like a library book." "Exactly like a library book." The press release went out Friday morning. Special single lot session, 1958 Meridian Yards Hull 1, sole surviving prototype, authenticated by Dr. Evelyn Haas. By 10, 3 sailing history publications had picked it up. By 11, the room at Marchetti and Klein had more people in it than a normal flagship sale. Theo drove over in the same truck, Josie beside him in a yellow dress, Barnacle on her lap. No suit, just a clean button-down. Nothing that would have made him unrecognizable to anyone who'd seen him crouched in a dusty warehouse 3 days earlier. Priya met them at the door with 2 access passes, crouching to Josie's eye level. "What's your name?" "Josie. This is Barnacle." Desmond Cray was already seated, arms folded, jaw tight. The look of a man trying to salvage something from a situation that had moved well past him. Dr. Haas sat in the front row, document case on the seat beside her, watching the hull on its low-display cradle, cleaned but not restored, every original surface honest. Celeste stepped to the podium. The room quieted. She opened the bidding at $1.5 million. It became $3 million in the first 20 seconds, 3 international phone bidders coming in at once. $3.8 million. Desmond raised his paddle at $4 million, and the number climbed past him almost immediately. $4.50 from a bidder on the screen. $5 from Desmond. $5.40 from the screen. Desmond, jaw tight, raised again. $5.8 million. The screen went quiet. $5,800,000, going once, Celeste said, steady. No movement. Going twice. The gavel came down. Sold. $6,100,000. The room broke into applause. Desmond stood, buttoned his jacket, and left through the side door without looking at anyone. Dr. Haas didn't stand. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes bright, looking at the hull like an old friend. Josie looked up at Theo. She didn't understand the number. She held Barnacle a little tighter and put her other hand in his. Celeste found Theo afterward, in the quieter hallway near the offices. No clipboard, no assistant, none of the practiced composure from before. "What did you see in that hull?" she asked. Not rhetorical this time. "The layup pattern. The centerboard stamp. I saw it in the preview photos sent to registered bidders the week before. I was already fairly sure walking in." She was quiet a moment. "I said what I said in front of a room full of people." "You did. Your daughter was there." "She's seen worse," Theo said, and it wasn't hard, just honest. "She's learning that being right doesn't mean people believe you right away. That's okay." Celeste held his gaze a beat longer than was comfortable. "I'll send a formal letter Monday." "Not necessary. But that's your call." 2 weeks later, nothing about the shop had changed on the outside. Same cracked coffee maker, same parts calendar on the wall. Theo opened a trust for Josie at the local credit union, put the rest toward a second bay and a part-time hand, so he could stop working every Saturday alone. Dr. Haas came by once more before heading home, with a flat package under her arm. An old black and white photo of the boatyard floor in 1958, a young William Halloran standing beside Hull 1 in its original, perfect form. On the back, in the same tight, slanting hand as the build record, "To the man who found what my grandfather hid." Theo hung it above the workbench, next to a photo of his own grandfather standing on a dock somewhere, decades ago. On a Thursday afternoon, Theo was on his back under the bilge pump again when Josie climbed onto her stool and began arranging Barnacle on the toolbox with careful precision. "What are you doing today?" "Looking at a boat." "Is it a good one?" "Don't know yet. Still looking." She thought about that. "Like the ugly one." "Like the ugly one," he agreed. That evening, locking up, his phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number, initials at the bottom, CM. "I want to apologize for what I said that morning. Not because of what it turned out to be, because I judged before I looked, and I know now what that could have cost." He read it twice, typed back, "Thanks for writing this. TM." He turned off the lights and stood a moment in the dark shop. Through the window, the street light threw a long rectangle across the floor, and in it sat the bilge pump cruiser. Nothing special, nothing hidden, just a boat that needed work. He looked at it anyway. Habit. The habit his grandfather had given him, of looking at ordinary things long enough that ordinary sometimes turns out to be something else entirely. End.